Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Mind Over Miles panel today. My name is Shayna Finkel, and I am the Program Assistant for the Florida Teen Safe Driving Coalition, and I am a current sophomore at the University of Florida. I am so excited to be here having this conversation today with such incredible panelists and have this discussion about how mental health really impacts young people and people of all ages behind the wheel. We talk about many things when we talk about young drivers. We talk about impairments. We talk about drowsy driving. We talk about distracted driving, aggressive driving, speeding. But we don't really talk about mental health and sleep quality and how that plays into how a young person is driving. We know that young people carry heavy schedules. They carry tough course loads. They carry so many things, and they all have such big impacts on their mind and their brain. So I'm really excited today to have a conversation about how all of these things are contributing factors to safe driving. It's not talked about enough, so I'm excited to start that conversation today. If this is your first webinar you are attending with us this week, welcome. We will have 5 webinars this week, all of which focus on different teen safe driving topics. All webinars can be found posted 7 a.m. daily on the Teen Driver Safety Week landing page on the Florida Teen Safe Driving Coalition website, where you found this video. As a reminder, 20 people will randomly be selected for a Chick-fil-A gift card. To be eligible, you must be in high school in Florida, watch the entirety of this webinar, and complete the post quiz by midnight of today, which is Wednesday, October 18th. You will need to be present throughout the entire webinar to get code words and information that you will need to answer the questions in the quiz at the end. So let's get started. The first person that I would like to introduce today is Dr. Kassenstein. Dr. Kassenstein is a board-certified clinical neuropsychologist and board-certified subspecialist in pediatric neuropsychology. She is Director of Psychology, Neuropsychology, and Social Work, and co-director of the Center for Behavioral Health at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. Dr. K, kick it off.
Thanks so much for having me. It is such an exciting opportunity to be here to talk about how our teenagers can think about the intersection of mental health and their attention. And for me, as a neuropsychologist, my entire career and work has focused around how our brain works and how each of our individual brains work to get the greatest outcomes. And that means, can we optimize our attention span, our planning and organization skills, whatever strengths we have to be able to leverage them to have the best quality of life moving forward. And part of that for me as a practitioner and as a person is driving. Such great independence and autonomy comes with driving, and safe driving is an incredibly important part of how we all are able to interact as a society, but also to keep ourselves and others safe as well. So this topic is super important to me. I have a child who, scary as it seems, will someday be driving, and I want everyone to be as safe as possible because, again, this is such a huge part of how we are autonomous and how we also are able to reach that highest quality of life. As a psychologist, I am sure many of you, as we've gone through the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as come through the other side and had so many different stressors and impacts to your life, recognize the importance of mental health, knowing that we are breaking down those barriers, being able to have open conversations about mental health, but also recognizing the impact it has on us and what we can do to optimize our everyday functioning. So even though we might still have tough days, it's about recentering ourselves, being able to recognize those signs and symptoms, and then making sure that we have strong coping strategies to be the best possible versions of who we are. So it's a pleasure to be here with this fantastic panel, and I look forward to a great discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. K, for being here. We're very excited to hear all of your input on this field. We know psychology and neuropsychology, these are big factors when we're talking about the discussion of mental health. So we're so happy to have you here today, and I look forward to our conversation later on. So next up, I would like to introduce Louis Pratt. Louis is the National President of Students Against Destructive Decisions. He resides in New York, where he attends Ithaca College. Having been involved with SAD since his freshman year of high school, Louis makes sure that our students are equipped with the proper knowledge and decision-making skills, which are crucial in our ever-changing world. Louis, a community engagement specialist for New York SAD, is dedicated to being a change maker and spokesperson for our youth. Louis, we're so glad to have you here today, also providing that youth perspective. So I'd love to hear from you.
Yes, thank you guys so much for having me. And again, it is so important to include the youth in a conversation about the youth. I think that's something we've seen becoming more prominent is that we are including youth when we're making decisions about the youth, and that is so important. And especially what we're talking about today with the crossover of mental health and driving, because mental health awareness is like it's big right now because it's so important, and traffic safety is so important. And when teens are just starting to get their learner's permits and their licenses, that in its own way is so stressful. All my friends will get, they've been so anxious. They're like, oh my gosh, my driver's test's coming up. And then they're like, I don't know, like I'm freaking out. And they need to be able to properly address that situation and not just look towards it as this anxious ball of stress that they don't know where to put it and do what with it. So this conversation, again, it's so important for our youth. And to have a youth perspective in here, it's so awesome. And I cannot wait to add to the conversation. And teens and students, we need to be paying attention to these kinds of things with them. Um, if we have had experience, I've already gotten my license and whatnot. So now what can I offer to the students who are in that process? How can I help them? How can I, add to the conversation, yet open it up for conversation? We need to have those kinds of talks. So again, thank you so much for having me, and I can't wait for our discussion.
Yay, thank you so much, Louie. So excited to hear all of the input that you will have on our discussion today and really have you be able to resonate with all of the young people from across the state and maybe even outside of the state of Florida participate in this. So thank you so much for being here. Next up, I'm very excited to introduce Vanessa. Vanessa Clark serves as the Behavioral Health Prevention Coordinator for the Player Center for Child Health at Wolfson Children's Hospital. In her position, she works to bring awareness to the current youth mental health crisis and provide resources to students, parents and guardians, educators, and healthcare providers on how to begin the conversation about mental health. Vanessa, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. So, I am Vanessa Clark, as stated. My entire job and my whole passion is to keep kids out of the hospital or prevent them from coming to seek mental emergency health care. And we do that by providing free resources to families, parents, guardians, educators, healthcare professionals, and most importantly, the youth themselves. And so, I'm super excited to be here. I have a nephew who just got his permit. So, this is very scary for me. And I'm here to learn as from the professionals that are here as well. So that way I can go back and translate that to the youth in my life. I plan to contribute today by giving some proactive strategies that families can do with their youth to assess their youth mental health, but also improve it if need be.
Wow, that's awesome. I'm so excited to hear more about this program, and I'm sure everybody listening will also be very excited to hear more about the program throughout the rest of our discussion today. So thank you so much for being here, Vanessa. Last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Sexton Raddick. Dr. Sexton Raddick is a fellow of the American Association of Sleep Medicine. She is a professor full-time at Elmhurst University and a clinical psychologist and sleep specialist at Suburban Pulmonary and Sleep Associates and Adventist Hospitals. She has over 60 peer-reviewed scientific articles and presentations in the area of sleep medicine. Dr. Sexton Raddick, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, I as well am so pleased to have been invited to this terrific panel and to increase the awareness and visibility of the intersection between mental health and safe teen driving, and the aspect of how much our health, our sleep health contributes to, because it is one of the pillars of health along with movement and nutrition, and how much that can contribute or perhaps take away from mental health issues. Emotional regulation, sleep deprivation has an impact on how our brain can function, as well as our performance in school, and importantly so, our ability to scan and drive safely. And so the ideas behind what some of the findings in sleep research and changing start times in schools tell us as implications is that your role as a driver, your mental health, your approach to what you're doing is so very important. And anything that you can do to pause and reflect and answer for yourself, I'm ready, I'm rested, I'm going to be a safe driver, is a kind of messaging I'd like to certainly contribute and be a part of. And I'm just so delighted to be in connection with these wonderful professionals. Thank you so much for this invite. I look forward to our discussions.
Awesome. Thank you so incredibly much for being here. I'm really excited for our discussions to come. So let's go ahead and kick it off. Okay, so my first question that I have for you all today is, what aspects of brain function are essential for safe driving, and how can mental health issues affect these functions?
Well, I'll go ahead and get started on that one. One of the really interesting parts about driving from a neuroanatomy perspective, meaning the different parts of your brain, is that driving really does include every single aspect of our brain and the systems that happen across our whole brain. So when we look at those connections, our brain functions, including things like planning and organization skills, response time, attention span, visual spatial functioning, meaning the understanding of where we see our car in the geography and space, potentially where we see other cars or hazards in space as well, all rely on different parts of the brains. And for some of those systems, they utilize every part of the brain from the front to the back and from the right to the left. Not to mention, if you think about it, we're reading signs, we're constantly taking in information and having to integrate that. And so, just even describing it, it takes a lot of our mental energy, a lot of our neuroanatomy. And then if there are other things that are taking away from that, such as worries, anxiety, concerns, stressors, or distress about a situation, and I'm one who's cried while driving before too, right? So any of those emotions can absolutely then be taking our mental energy that our brain needs to focus on all of the components of driving into another area, therefore not giving us quite as much of that attention, focus, and all those other brain systems maintaining to what's happening right in front of us.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I really appreciated you sharing that kind of medical side of things, because obviously we know like driving is a task, but how many of us have been just driving down the highway or I-75 for way too long, right? And you kind of almost feel like you're just doing it effortlessly. Driving just starts feeling like, wow, I'm still doing this, hour 3. And you don't think that you're taking up that much brain function. So it's really surprising to know really how much of your brain is being utilized when driving, and how just the smallest distractions take away things that you really, really need to be safe. So thank you for sharing that. Did anybody have anything else to share on that question?
Yeah, so as Dr. K said, we do know that driving can be very emotional, and we know that emotional regulation typically in females doesn't fully develop until age 25, and for males, age 30. And so that's why practicing coping strategies with emotional regulation is really important, especially in the youth, because once their lid is flipped, it's really hard to make sound decisions. And so they need to be able to bring themselves back down in case that does occur.
What also happens too, all of this functioning that the brain is doing with scanning and visual inspection and trying to modulate a speed, and then the distractions with emotionality can all be compromised if the teen, which is highly likely, is drowsy. If last night was not enough sleep and their sleep restriction, whether it's because of too much homework or doing streaming of videos or whatever it may have robbed them. Our youth, 13 to about 20-ish, really need to be sleeping anywhere between 8 to 9 hours, and it is just not happening. As a population, on surveys done by professionals in National Sleep Foundation and other noteworthy research endeavors, they are finding that our youth are chronically sleep deprived. So they've got that happening, and then their brain is trying to correct for being drowsy while they're trying to pay attention and drive on the road. And that's if all the other behavioral factors are in line, such as not talking with friends. And then the thing that we're all thinking and we haven't mentioned yet, but is so dangerous, is that phone and texting, or just one short message, I'm going to do this kind of thing, can take the already compromised, sleep deprived brain and put them in grave danger. And so drowsy driving is something as small as missing an hour and a half of sleep one night can culminate night after night and affect all of this functioning that's occurring, and then detract from the regulation of emotion and our ability to scan and operate that motor vehicle properly.
As someone that is still in that age range that you mentioned, I certainly cannot say that I get 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night. So I think, Louis, would you agree with that?
I agree wholeheartedly. Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's something that a lot of people on this panel can definitely, or not from on this panel, but watching this panel can take from. And drowsy driving is definitely something I want to come back to later in conversation, because I think that's a really big part of the conversation that we're going to have today. But I want to stay real quick on something that Dr. K was kind of talking about, where we were talking about that anxiety and the mental health aspects of things. So could you explain, Dr. K, or anyone, how stress, anxiety, or other mental health conditions can manifest in driving behaviors?
I want to start generally to start because I think one of the things that we often don't talk about with anxiety is that anxiety can facilitate us. There is a healthy amount of anxiety and stress that even makes you more attentive to a situation or more aware of what's happening. And it sometimes becomes that crossover into what I call a debilitating anxiety, when then it starts to really impact your functioning. Maybe you're getting panicky or nervous on the highway when there are big trucks around you and you feel your hands start to get sweaty. Or maybe, yep, your heart races a little bit more. You start to feel in the pit of your stomach like something's going to happen. And you start to have that language that you say to yourself that is more negative statements. Again, there's a piece of it too that, Louis, I hear you say, I was so nervous for my driving test, right? But it made me pay attention to every detail and do my parallel parking just perfectly, because that was that anxiety that was facilitating. So when we think about a lot of these mental health and mental well-being concepts, I really want our teenagers to also recognize there's a part of stress or distress or anxiety that is a normal continuum. And it does kind of place us in the time where we are maybe more alert, maybe a little bit more attentive to the details. But it's when it becomes to that other side where our anxiety is heightened, we start using negative language with ourselves, maybe more catastrophizing in our language. And then we have those physical symptoms, which can be really distressing and take away from our focus, attention, visual inspection of the road when we're in our driving position.
Yeah, I think that that's all really great impact. Louis, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to add on to that. And I think even, you know, the stress and anxiety and all those kind of feelings, they add up. So if the teen or the driver in general is starting to get more angry and whatnot, they're going to tend to speed. They're going to have that road rage kind of sense. So it's really their emotions play a part in how they're driving, and that's all impacted by their mental state.
It's almost as if we're saying use the strategies we talked about as a way to help yourself, and in certain circumstances to make sure that you pay attention to not doing them. That is to say, in this instance, if you're stressed with trying to get to an internship interview on time and there's lots of traffic and it's evoking an emotional response, letting yourself be slightly distracted. Perhaps there's a favorite song on or something, or just shifting your thoughts to trying to be able to realize in the moment that that is a response. And right now, I've got to put that on hold so that I can maintain myself and my safety. The idea of emotional regulation is being able to shift away from or to fight the urge of staying and ruminating within that as best you can. Not always easy to do, but would be helpful to use some sort of very slight distraction, kind of opposite what we just said, but a constructive distraction of a song or a music, or perhaps even talking out loud in the car about your excitement for that internship interview you're driving to, or whatever it is that is causing that kind of concern.
I think that's a really interesting point. I don't think I've actually ever heard that before, that constructive distractions, not that we are encouraging distractions behind the wheel today, but those constructive distractions. I think that's something really interesting. And I think that was a really great point. So thank you for sharing that with us. So Dr. Sexton-Radek, I'd actually like to go back to a point that you were starting to make earlier about those hours of sleep that this age group really should be getting every night. And I know you started to touch on it a little bit, but how do those quality hours of sleep impact a driver's mental state and alertness behind the wheel?
We often use the idea of the bank account that you keep withdrawing money and you get in deficit. And one night of poor sleep, not to that 8 hour plus zone, the next night, and you have this culmination of sleep debt. Now, with teenagers, they also have, in that age range I gave, they not only have this mounting sleep debt that's occurring, but also at the same time, their internal physiology is changing where their readiness to fall asleep is moving up. Instead of that feeling sleepy at 10 o'clock, it's moving up in many of the studies to as late as 11:30, 11:20. And so they're not ready to fall asleep. And then if you do the arithmetic, which we were joking about that before, how, you just look at what time they have to get up in the morning to prepare themselves to get to school. The hours that are remaining are insufficient. And then that day reoccurs of sleep loss and then readjusting to that new set point. And it's harder with the newer change in that set point for them to keep that reoccurring advanced sleep phase, or trying to move to an early sleep time in the morning each day that they're doing this. So they're doing two things. They're sleep deprived and they're getting up early. And so they're trying to right themselves to that early morning wake up. And the result is a drowsy teen or drowsy person. And then getting behind the wheel, that drowsiness is going to subtract from those needed abilities to do those visual scanning and judgment issues, not letting emotions or cognitive thoughts get in the way, to lose control over their calmness to keep track of things on the road and pay attention and drive safely.
I think that a lot of people watching today can resonate a lot with what you just said. Just me personally sitting here listening to what you were saying, I was comparing everything you were saying to my high school schedule and how I would probably get home from soccer or track practice, do all my homework. By the time I showered, ate, I was probably in bed around midnight, and then allow the 1 hour TikTok scroll that all teens must do before bed. And I'm probably going to sleep now at 1, and then I find myself waking up at 5:30 in the morning, eating breakfast, getting ready for school, packing up all the little siblings in the car, getting them to their schools. So now not only am I responsible for myself safety, but my younger siblings that I'm bringing to school, right? Where I was going off of 4 or 5 hours of sleep. Now I'm also thinking about everything that I've got to do for the day, maybe that big test I have, but I'm also, of course, singing Taylor Swift in the car. So I'm thinking about that as well. But there I am on only 4 or 5 hours of sleep. And it's interesting that you mentioned that, because it's true. I functioned totally fine. But now as a college student, I couldn't imagine doing my high school day on 4 to 5 hours of sleep. So I think what you were saying about how it becomes a new normal for these teenagers is totally not okay. And then they get to that adulthood and they're like, oh my goodness, what was I doing? And we realize how dangerous it really was. So thank you for sharing that. I think that that was some very interesting input on that. Did anyone
And Gersh, one of your points really emphasizes that important aspect of turning off all of those electronics an hour before sleep, so that that blue light doesn't stimulate the brain to make it think it's time to be doing things and be alert. I realize, and I'm regarding of what you said, it's a to-do task that's part of a rite of passage of that time. I understand that, but it's giving some messaging and signaling to the brain that's not necessary. So any way that that can be advanced earlier in the night would be best, if possible.
I really love that we're diving into that medical aspect here. Dr. K, did you have something to add?
I just want to add, because we all do it, the TikTok scroll. We are doing it, and it is a way for me to want to go to bed at 10 and end up going to bed at midnight. But just as a reminder, social media impacts our mood too. And so when we are not following people that we know in real life, when we're seeing kind of the best portrait, or even thinking, gosh, I missed out on that, or this influencer, this person is doing that, and you're doing all of that self-comparison, we know that those things have an impact on our mood and on our anxiety as well. So not only is sleep obviously a huge piece of that, and I think Dr. Sexton-Raddick would agree, no electronics in the bedroom, 1 hour, if ideally 2 hours before bed, but the TikTok scroll, any of those social media scrolls can have a huge impact on our mood, which could carry over to the next day, not to mention that sleep debt on top of it.
And I think that's why it's so important also to just have people you can talk to about your mental health, especially within youth. We all carry invisible backpacks. So adults, we have all these things, like you mentioned, having to take your siblings to school and the big test. Those are things that we carry that other people cannot see. And so we may look like we're regulated on the outside, but really struggling internally. And that all can affect our sleep, because when you're mentally exhausted, it's hard to get that physical rest. And so making sure you have outlets to talk to people to start unloading that backpack is just as important.
Those were all really great points. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing that. I want to go on to our next question, but it's along the same lines here. So I know we've talked a lot about drowsy driving, and you guys are already starting to give some tips, such as, not having the phone in the bedroom 1 to 2 hours prior to bed, or unpacking that backpack and everything. So, but what are some more tips maybe for how we can effectively combat drowsy driving?
If it's possible that perhaps you're not the driver, if you can be part of a carpool where you don't drive, or if it's a close enough location, perhaps some cycling might work. But that may not be an alternative that all students can do. With the drowsy driving, as best you can, feeling that drowsiness, perhaps a very, very small amount of caffeine. I'm talking 1 cup of tea, hot tea or coffee, just for its alerting properties. But the single most impactful factor would be to get some natural bright light first thing in the morning. That will send a signal to your brain. It's time to be awake and do our task. And at the same time, it will allow you to feel a sense of vibrancy and be able to manage yourself. So exposure to bright light, a regular wake up time, although with your schedules, I think that's already happening, as you've talked about. And if possible, then the last thing I would say, and this may not go over well, is because I know a lot of people don't care to do this, but have some breakfast, or at least some water and a bite of a piece of banana, or a spoonful of yogurt, and then wrap it up, and then tomorrow do the same. That change in your blood sugar level, that natural bright light to signal to your brain that we're doing as best we can with the situation to keep you as alert and vibrant as possible.
Yeah, I think that really talks about just routine in general, right? I think teens' morning routines often don't look that healthy, with get the breakfast, go outside, maybe stretch. I don't know. Maybe the first light you get in your face in the morning shouldn't be your phone or your open computer to check your emails, right? So, I mean, maybe I'm just speaking from my own experience here. I'm definitely learning here today about what I personally need to change. So I hope others are as well. But yeah, so just those routine things. Vanessa, did you have something to add to that?
Pretty much along the same lines, with breaks like winter break or even with summer break, teens tend to get off schedule. So making sure that, 2 weeks before school start, you're restarting those bedtimes and wake up times, and you're keeping it consistent so your body can snap back into the routine that you had originally.
Did anyone have any more tips for us today? All right. So we are about halfway through our discussion today. So I am going to share the special code word that is needed to complete the post-webinar survey for a chance to win a free Chick-fil-A gift card. Reminder that 20 people will randomly be selected. Today's word is awake. Again, that is awake, A-W-A-K-E. You will need to remember this word for the post survey to be eligible to win. All right, let's jump right back into our discussion. So Louie, I'd kind of like to hear from you on this, but anybody can contribute. But how can young drivers like yourself raise awareness about the significance of mental health and safe driving among your peers? Do you maybe have some examples of strategies that you've employed in your communities?
Yeah, no, of course. So I think one thing, especially with SAD, that we work on is that peer-to-peer outreach model. So so this past spring, I went into classrooms and I did the Crossroads presentation that SAD has, which you're familiar with, Shayna. It focuses on mental health and driving and the intersection between the both. Yeah, it's a wordplay. We love a good wordplay. So when I went in and talked to the students on it, they were like, wow, like I didn't think of this. Like, thank you for bringing that to us, Louis. But I think that it was more, and I know that it was more successful because it was a peer-to-peer outreach model. It wasn't their teacher putting up another presentation in the classroom. It was me, their peer that they know, coming in and having a conversation. Having that conversation about the mental health and the driving too is so important because you have to kind of break down that like barrier of like, oh, I am assuming that they know this. No, you need to have the conversation. When I go home occasionally from college and I see my friends who are like, I have my road test next week. I'm so nervous. I'm like, okay, well, let's talk about it. What are you feeling? Do you feel nervous? And having those conversations, the emphasis is conversation. You have to talk. And when I presented the material to these students, I made sure that the floor was open for discussion at any point. Are you feeling a certain way about this? Should we talk more about this? What do you and don't you understand? And then, so we took this presentation in my hometown, we put it into this model of this program. And we had 10th graders, which in New York, when you are 16, you are in 10th grade, and that's when you get your learner's permit. So they would watch the presentation, and then they would come and participate in a safe driving activity and then a mindfulness activity so that they knew how to safely drive. And if they did feel stressed or overwhelmed while driving, they could find a spot to pull over and practice a minute or two of mindfulness to get them back on track. And then just overall in general, we talk to them at the end of a school day. I always sit in my car and I like take a deep breath. I debrief, like, okay, here's what happened. I kind of maybe chat with myself or if there's anybody with me, just because when you're at school or you're at work all day, so much happens and you're taking it all in. And then you get in your car and you drive home and you're sitting at a red light and you're like, oh my gosh, this, and this. And then you miss the red light changing to green because your mind is totally on that. I had a teacher who missed his exit because he had to help someone on the side of the road, and that's what his brain was focused on afterwards. We have to even have internal conversations with ourselves before we start driving. Take a deep breath, be mindful, and it all will work out in a way if you do it correctly.
So I had the honor of working with Louis and SAD back in my high school days. And I know that Louis has done so many great things, like the ones that he has just talked about in his, not only his school or community, but his state and then on the national level of SAD. And Louis, I don't want to put you on the spot right now, but I know that mental health has been a very big passion of yours, as well as trying to keep our peers safe behind the wheel. But I know that you have a program called You Matter that you founded and started. And I'd love for you to share with everyone today a little bit about that program and maybe how they can employ that in their own schools and communities to address mental health, to maybe start at the root of the problem before our peers are getting behind the wheel.
Yeah, of course. I'm going to throw in a shameless plug. You can follow us at You Matter, just a U, not Y-O, You Matter 23 on Instagram and Facebook. And I've collabed with SAD and we made a toolkit that provides for 12 months, so 12 activities that you can do and implement into your school to focus on suicide prevention and mental health awareness. And a majority, I would say probably like 9 out of 12 of the activities are focused around using a Post-it note as a simple way to provide positivity to students. And that can increase, having a better mental health, start your day off on a positive note or, leaving positive notes on the mirrors of the bathroom, like all that kind of stuff. And these different activities we go into schools and we implement them across the state, across the nation. Of course, my hometown SAD chapter, I make sure that they're always doing them because they should support me, of course. But doing these different things, it creates a welcoming environment for your community. And so that opens up that conversation with the mental health. And again, like I said, check us out, You Matter 23 on social media, and our toolkit is on there. There's all sorts of different activities you can do, and it will most likely make your environment more welcoming and inclusive.
I definitely urge any high school students that are on here today, or maybe teachers, or just anyone that has access to a high school, definitely checking out that toolkit. Again, this was something that was created in New York but I know schools in Florida, it has been reached by. I know many schools here that take part in it, and it's a super easy campaign that you can do just to really address this mental health crisis that we really are experiencing, not just in the United States, but everywhere. And I know our conversation here today is about driving and safe driving, but I think a lot of what we've been hearing today is mental health is really the root of it. We were hearing earlier about just being on your phone and how that can set off your mental health. Or if you're angry, I think Louis mentioned that earlier, you're angry, now you're driving faster or more aggressive. And whenever we think about all these problems that we're talking about with young people, so many of those times we can track it back to the mental health and the state of our mind. So I urge anyone that has access to a high school to check out that programs like it, and try to implement something in there just to bring up the aura of your school and the environment that teens spend so much time in. So Louis, thank you for sharing all that today. I want to move on to our next question, but it's kind of stemming from this and talking about, mental health. So like I said prior, it's really a crisis. And I think a lot of people, we've done a lot of things nowadays, this generation, to try to remove that stigma that surrounds mental health. But unfortunately, it's not 100% gone. There's a lot of people that are suffering silently when we know that there's so many resources for them and so many people here to help. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit and maybe hear about some common signs that a driver's mental health may be affecting their ability to drive safely. Because I think a lot of young people, people of all ages today, don't even recognize when they're being affected by their mental health. So can someone go ahead and start us off with that?
I'll say that one of the biggest predictors of mood and anxiety concerns in our teenagers is irritability. So being easily set off, easily frustrated, right? Getting to even what Louis said about, some of that kind of like aggressive driving, if something has happened, speeding. So when you as an individual are feeling just more agitated, more easily set off, or recognizing I'm feeling down, I'm feeling depressed, anxious, worried, or nervous. I think our teens now are far better at recognizing these things and checking in with one another to say, are you okay? Than any other generation before. And I am so proud and I absolutely love that. But I think that that's what is really the important part, to do that quick check. Where am I at? I personally get upset and angry, right? And if I'm angry, it's usually the result of another emotion. Am I embarrassed? Am I frustrated with someone? Did something happen that made me feel shame? Or did I not get the grade I wanted after I really tried and studied and I just blanked when I got in there? And so when we're thinking about, where am I at just emotionally, but then as we talked about before, how has my physical body been impacted by my mental health? Is my heart rate up? Am I having those sweaty, maybe shaky palms? Is my breathing a little bit different? Is my heart rate different? So doing that full body check-in, seeing where you're at, seeing if maybe you're a little bit more heightened, and then really just acknowledging that. That's the first step, is recognizing and acknowledging where you're at right now, and then utilizing those strong coping strategies and even maybe some self-talk in those scenarios too.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. Something, as mental health has started to become more at the forefront, as it should be, is we should be treating it just like our physical health. When think about it, like if your arm is in pain or your leg is in pain, you're like, before it breaks or before I pull a muscle or something, I'm gonna go to the doctors and have it checked out. If you're starting to feel those symptoms with your mental health where something's off, you might feel agitated about something, you might not feel right, you need to go and talk with someone, talk with a therapist, a psychologist, somebody, before that escalates to the next level. You should be taking care of it just the same. They should be equals on every single level.
Definitely recognizing you're about to get burned out before you're burned out. So for me, I know if I'm driving home and I have no idea how I got from point A to B, then I'm getting to the point of mental fatigue and emotional fatigue, and I need to do some self-care strategies. If I'm reading a book and I read the whole page and have no idea what I just read because my mind was on something else, then maybe I need to have a conversation with somebody about what I'm feeling or what I'm trying to process in my mind.
And adding also to all of these ideas that seem quite workable might be something that might not be practical, but if possible, not driving or pulling over, and something as simple as movement, getting out of the car safely and having a stretch, breathing in some natural air, natural sunlight, if that's the weather that day, maybe a little shoulder rolling, and if possible, reaching out to a friend or family member with a call. And then when you've recomposed and reset yourself, then possibly getting back in the car and continue your driving journey, if it would work. Your schedule, I know we're all mindful of schedules we're on, but as we've heard from all the speakers just now, investing in yourself and being as vital as you can and relax with these emotions of anxiety, of dysregulation is quite important.
Those were all really great tips that I think everyone, no matter what age, can do every single day. And I think that a big topic of conversation I've just been hearing come up a lot today are things about routines. I think all of these tips that were given can be put into a routine. When you get into your car, what are some of the things you do? You check your mirrors, make sure you can see maybe mom or dad drove your car last, so you got to make sure that your mirrors are set. You set your seat up, you get your phone plugged in, you turn on your music that you're going to listen to for the drive, and then you put your phone away. Hopefully you do all of these things when you first get into the car. Why isn't a mindful check part of that pre-driving routine? Why aren't we sitting there, like many people have just said, am I okay to drive right now? How am I feeling? The heart rate, the physical check, am I feeling okay? Am I anxious? Am I angry? These are all questions that we should be asking ourselves before we drive. It should be in our routine. Before you play a soccer game or whatever sport you play, do you go into the game if you feel like your leg's going to fall off? Probably not. You ask yourself, am I feeling okay to do this right now? So these are all things. Driving shouldn't be any different. Before we get behind the wheel and drive, we should be self-assessing, doing that stretching, doing those self-examinations to make sure that we are okay to drive. So I think everyone's points there were so good and part of that routine that we can use. So thank you for all that input. And I have one last question for our panel today. So in your opinion, I would like to hear from all of you. What is the most important takeaway or message that you'd like our audience to remember about our conversation today?
Well, Shauna, your words resonate with me. A schedule, a routine, getting up at a regular wake up time, seeing that all of the things you need to do are done, that you have a readiness to drive. You're checking yourself in terms of all the things you need to do for the day, and adding in as best we can these wonderful kind of interventions like we heard about with the mindfulness that Louis talked about and some other aspects. So this setup of this scheduling and allowing this predictable pathway for you to be able to proceed will give you that calmness and that continuity that's so important. And as best as possible, just one other word, getting as much sleep as you can.
I want to add too, just that check-in, and Louis, I hope I don't steal what you're going to say, but I love physical health and mental health, equal, equivalent attention in every way.
And I'll add on to that. Big important thing from this conversation is to have conversations. Get yourself figured out and know how you can have the mindfulness and add that to your driving. And then once you figure it out, remember, youth, you have a voice. So take what you learned and bring it to the others. And there's all sorts of great resources at sad.org, SADD.org, if you want to learn some of that great stuff like the Crossroads presentation.
Okay, you definitely stole what I was going to say. But I think mental health can be so taboo, especially with youth, and it does affect every single aspect of our lives. So let's have those difficult conversations. So now I'm going to steal from Louis, and on our sleeves, we're trying to break the stigma surrounding youth mental health and just help families start the conversation, which can be the most difficult part. So we do provide free resources. If you go to wolfsandchildren.com/on our sleeves, we have PDF format where it's broken down into teens, parents and guardians, educators on how to start the conversations, but there's worksheets. So if you're feeling anxious, do you write about it? Do you sing? What do you do to relieve some of that anxiety you're feeling? We talk about things like OCD, ADHD. We give resources to families. So I highly encourage everyone to go on there, do some of the worksheets, do some of the activities, find what works for you, because not every coping strategy works for everybody. So that way, when you're sound mentally, everything else just seems to flow. If I break my arm or get a cold, I know where to go. But if I'm struggling mentally, do I know what resources are available to me? And that's my hope for the youth.
And my takeaway for everyone here today, everyone's was equally important. And it's hard to be last because everyone already gave such great input. But I would say that my takeaway would be to remember that we have to go back to the roots of the problems. There's so many problems that we talk about every single day here in the traffic safety realm about all these driving issues that youth face. Go back to the root of all of those things and look at what's there. Why it has to be holistic. Why are we making these actions? What came before that? And I urge everyone that was here today listening in, whether you're a young person, a parent, maybe you're coming from a national organization, trying to just learn a little bit about what youth are experiencing today. I urge you to take everything that was shared today into consideration, into your own program making and to the own things that you do in your school, and think about that. How can we include the intersection between mental health and driving? How can we talk about this? Because it is so important. And I hope to see more about this topic talked about in our traffic safety field. So I just want to take a second to thoroughly thank our panelists for being here today. The amount of wealth of information that was shared, and I certainly learned something today. So I hope everybody here also learned something. Thank you so much for our panelists. Silent round of applause because they were absolutely fabulous. In case you missed Monday and Tuesday's webinar, we are super excited to announce the opening of our new Florida Teen Safe Driving Coalition Ambassador Program. If you are a high school student in Florida who is passionate about making a difference in your community, want to help promote teen safe driving practices and save lives on the road, or just really love the conversation that we had today, we would love to have you. There is no application required. Just scan this QR code that is right here on the screen to register. The next screen is going to be the QR code that will take you to the post quiz for today's webinar. Please complete it to be entered for a chance to win a Chick-fil-A gift card. And we hope to see you tomorrow at our Fast and Fatal webinar discussing the dangers of speed racing and destructive driving. You will get an email at the conclusion of this webinar today with some feedback of all the information that was given to you, including all of the resources that were discussed in today's webinar, as well as the contact information for all of our panelists should you have any follow-up questions for them. Thank you so much for attending. Stay safe.